As we go through our day-to-day lives, it's really pretty easy to have feelings of frustration and helplessness, feelings that we have no control over our life, and feelings that bad things are eventually going to happen. Most of us wake up in the morning and listen to the news, or we read the daily newspaper, or we do that when we go to bed, which probably isn't a good idea. To say the least, we're usually bombarded by bad news, by wars and killing, by senseless murder in our cities and communities, by countless cases of human abuse of other people, by reports of disease and death, by politics, which wrenches our soul. If we look at the big picture, when we look at world history, we find few periods that are not marked by aggression and war, by prejudice and arrogance, by famine and plague or natural calamities, all of which cause great human suffering. Given all of this, there's really little wonder why human beings can develop a sense of pessimism, if not outright hopelessness, and some people do. The interesting thing is that people do not approach the difficulties in their life the same way. Faced with similar circumstances, some people adopt an attitude of pessimism and negativity. They focus on what is bad, and they fail to recognize or accept the positive things in their life. Others tend to make light of the bad things that happen to them and adopt a positive, optimistic attitude. They seem always to look for the bright side in any given situation. The attitude that people adopt in this regard is reflected in their personality and how they project themselves to others. We all know people who fit both descriptions. The key point is that, to an extent, depending on the situation, a person chooses whether to be positive or negative and how they project themselves to the world and the people around them. Pessimism and optimism are choices. They're choices we make. They're not automatic reactions. We all need to think about this. When really terrible things happen to people, it is, of course, understandable that they become negative and pessimistic, at least for a while. That's normal. Nearly all of us will do this in the short term, and it's okay. When we witness devastation such as in the West Coast wildfires that we constantly see now, in hurricanes, and in an amazing number of tornadoes in the Midwest, we often see pessimistic people. Curiously, though, in these disasters, we also see optimistic people as well, people that take a positive look at their situation. Last week, for example, I saw on a news interview with a man whose house had been flattened by a tornado, and they asked him basically how he felt about that. I mean, why would you ask somebody that? I mean, don't you know the answer? But he said, well, I'm alive and my family is okay, and I'm very thankful for this. We will rebuild. The problem is that if a person does not or cannot shake their negative feelings, it will affect who they are becoming, and how they will relate to other people. The interesting thing with pessimists and optimists is you can find both in any given situation, and the seriousness of the situation isn't necessarily a factor. I've met people who have a good life, a good job, and a good family. They are healthy and seemingly better off than a lot of other people, but they have a very sour attitude on life. They're negative people. When the slightest thing goes wrong, they project a woe is me attitude. What's happening here is this type of person is essentially viewing themselves as the center of the universe. They quickly find fault with just about everything. They refuse to place their life in the context of other people, and they don't recognize all the good things they have. In the extreme, these kind of people can be toxic, and they exude a negativity and a negative energy, which they project to everyone around them. These type of people are not and cannot be happy so long as they remain the center of the universe. Then, of course, there's the optimists. Sometimes, despite overwhelming problems and serious troubles, these type of people constantly look for the bright side of any situation. Even in the midst of terrible situations, they refuse to stay depressed. They sometimes even force themselves to smile and say something funny or kind or even inspirational. Even in despair, optimists choose to be positive. I mentioned some weeks ago a friend of mine I visited at Sloan Kettering Cancer Hospital in New York. On the day he died, I came to visit him and he said, "Chris, I'm the luckiest man in the world." When he saw my puzzled face, he told me all the great things that he had had in his life. Shortly after this, he passed away. He was in his late 40s. My friend was an eternal optimist, and throughout his life, his outlook and personality uplifted everyone he came in contact with. President Harry Truman once said, "A pessimist is one who makes difficulties of his opportunities, and an optimist is one who makes opportunities of his difficulties." Being optimistic or pessimistic is a very human characteristic. Animals don't have the ability to choose to be positive or negative. They just react to the world around them with instincts, and in higher animals, perhaps some emotion. Why humans can choose to be positive or negative, pessimistic or optimistic, is a curious thing. Just about everything that makes up a human being, including our thoughts and emotions, have evolved over millions of years. I find it interesting that we can choose to be negative or positive in just about any given situation. You would think that humans would have evolved to always be positive, because positive and optimistic people, that attitude leads to survival more than being negative. To me, it shows that evolution is a lot more complex and uncertain than some people think. Great people are not negative. They are not pessimists. Great people are always more optimistic, which is what drives them to do things that change the world, because optimism tells them they can succeed, even in the midst of enormous obstacles. The Declaration of Independence on July 4th of 1776 was approved by the Continental Congress, a group of men who believed they really could become independent from Great Britain, an idea that wasn't logical and it wasn't very reasonable at the time. Were the Continental Congress a group of pessimists with a negative attitude, America would not exist. All through American history, it was positive leaders who changed the world and shaped America for the better, oftentimes against seemingly insurmountable odds. President Lincoln suffered from clinical depression, but he refused to succumb to this disease. He chose instead to remain positive and optimistic that the North could suppress the rebellion in the South and that the slaves could be free. He took an incredibly bold and positive step when he wrote and proclaimed the Emancipation Proclamation. Similarly, Martin Luther King Jr. was certainly a positive and optimistic man. When he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, it was a measure of his incredible optimism. And guess what? His dream became a reality. Only 1 year later, civil rights legislation followed. Martin Luther King Jr. was an optimist. And in more recent times, we can reflect on the incredible optimism and positive power of Nelson Mandela, a man imprisoned for 27 years because of his crimes to eliminate the scourge of apartheid in the land of South Africa. A man who chose to remain in prison until all prisoners for the same cause were freed. Nelson Mandela had superhuman positive and optimistic strength. In the midst of his imprisonment, what led him to believe he could help eliminate apartheid. It was an impossible idea. By all logic of the time, it couldn't happen. And yet he made it so because of his attitude, an attitude that he chose. Look at Alexei Navalny, a man poisoned by Putin, a man poisoned who went to Western Europe and then returned to Russia knowing he would be imprisoned. And then a while later, Putin poisoned him again. This time he killed him. Navalny loved his country and believed by his actions he would help change Russia. He was an optimist in the face of death. And whilst his dreams of a free Russia certainly haven't happened yet, I believe they will eventually. How will history view the actions of Alexei Navalny versus those of Vladimir Putin? I think you know the answer. Many people imprisoned for political crimes become embittered by their experience. They become negative, pessimistic, and sometimes even hateful people. In some cases, if given the opportunity, they seek revenge against their enemies. Because of their hatred, they choose the negative. Not Nelson Mandela. Against all odds, he remained positive. He forgave his enemies, and he made them his friends. His positive energy and de facto love changed his country, and I think in the long term, I believe he changed the world too. In so many professions, we find the role of the positive, the optimistic person changing the world. To me, one of the most notable scientists in recent times was Stephen Hawking. Born in 1942, Hawking was a theoretical physicist and cosmologist. Early in his life, Hawking developed a form of ALS disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, which over time progressively paralyzed his body to the point he could barely say a few words and couldn't get out of a wheelchair. Despite these overwhelming odds, he became one of the most brilliant cosmologists in the world, producing numerous books and papers on cosmology and astrophysics. Had Hawking chosen a negative, pessimistic view of life, a choice by rights would seem to have been logical, he would never have produced the vast work which has given cosmology so much in the past several decades. Science and human knowledge is richer because of Hawking's choice to be positive. What successful athlete do you know who has a dour, negative view of life and a pessimistic view of their ability? There's a reason there aren't any. It's because people succeed when they choose to be positive, when they adopt an optimistic attitude towards what they can do, when they continue to strive despite huge obstacles. One of the jobs of a coach is to constantly affirm a positive, optimistic attitude on what is possible, even in the times when the odds seem to be really tough. Well, some might say, I know there's positive, optimistic people, and I recognize this plays into how successful a person can be and how they can change the world, but you don't understand how miserable and difficult my life is. I wish I had a choice to be positive. To this I say, I understand how a difficult moment can make every one of us negative or pessimistic. This is normal, but it is a person's choice that they remain this way. Being a negative and pessimistic person is not a condition we have no control over. It's a choice we make, and this choice makes us who we are, how we are perceived by others, and whether or not we can make a positive difference in our life and in the world around us. There's few circumstances more horrible than those experienced by the victims of the German Holocaust. Innocent men, women, and children arrested in the middle of the night and thrust into slave labor and extermination camps where murder and starvation were everyday occurrences. How in the world, under such circumstances, could a person even begin to think about adopting a positive and optimistic view of life? when they witnessed the murder of their loved ones and they themselves experienced unspeakable trauma. And yet, some people in the camps chose to be optimistic, and they refused to lose hope. They refused to succumb to despair and to adopt a negative view of the world. The noted Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl put it this way: every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything for the circumstance, renouncing your freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of the typical inmate. Even though conditions such as lack of sleep, insufficient food, and various mental stresses may suggest that the inmates were bound to react in certain ways, in the final analysis it became clear that the sort of person the prisoner became was the result of their inner decision and not the result of camp influences alone. Fundamentally, therefore, any man or woman can, under such difficult circumstances, decide what shall become of him or her, mentally and spiritually. A person may retain their human dignity and their positive outlook on life, even in a concentration camp. And he continued, the way in which a person accepts their fate and all the suffering it entails, the way a person takes up their cross gives them ample opportunity, even under the most difficult of circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to their life. It may remain brave and dignified and unselfish, or, in the bitter fight for self-preservation, a person may forget their human dignity and become no more than an animal. Herein lies the chance for a person either to choose to make use or to forego the opportunities of taming the moral values that a difficult situation may afford them. And this decides whether a person is worthy of their suffering or not. As each situation in life represents a challenge to a man or woman and presents a problem for them to solve, the question of the meaning of life may actually be reversed. Ultimately, humans should not ask what is the meaning of their life, but rather they must recognize it is they who are asked. In a word, each person is questioned by life itself, and they can only answer to life by answering for their own life. As Viktor Frankl also believed, a person is positive or negative, a pessimist or an optimist, by their own choice, ultimately regardless of the situation. While it is understandable that people in extremely difficult situations can be negative, to remain negative can be a poison to their own life. And it can be a poison to those around them, including the people that they love. And it can also negatively affect their ability to cope with life and to rise to the many challenges that face them. Negativity and pessimism impact a person's spirituality and their outlook on life. It can destroy their relationship with humanity and with the sacred source of life, that transcending mystery defined in so many ways by the world's religions. Simply put, spiritual people, those that connect with the sacred in some way, however they define it, are not negative and pessimistic people. Instead, spiritual people are positive people, and they adopt an attitude that it is possible for a given situation to become better in some way. No matter how difficult the situation, there is always a brighter side. Winston Churchill once said, "I'm an optimist. It doesn't seem to be much use to be anything else." Negative and pessimistic people are not happy people. They find fault with everything. Nothing is ever good enough. In the extreme, they can be selfish people who believe the world revolves around them. And therefore, anything bad that happens to them is the result of unfair treatment by others or by life itself. Unfortunately, we all know people like this. There was an Irish woman I once knew. Her life was filled with challenges and sorrows, but whenever a person asked her how she was, her answer was always the same no matter what. Grand, just grand. Grand, just grand. She always wanted to project a positive outlook on her life. I really do think a person's commitment to being positive and optimistic plays a critical factor in their ultimate happiness. Let us all try to learn to smile and laugh and bring joy to others, even in the most difficult situations. It will feel good. As the professor and author and teacher Charles Lawton from American University once said, "Promise yourself to be so strong that nothing can disturb your peace of mind, to talk health, happiness, and prosperity to every person you meet, to make all your friends feel that there is something good in them, to look at the sunny side of everything and make your optimism come true, to think only the best, to work only for the best, and to expect only the best, to be just as enthusiastic about the success of others as you are about your own, to forget the mistakes of the past and press on to the greater achievements of the future, to wear a cheerful countenance at all times and give every living creature you meet a smile, to give so much time to the improvement of yourself that you have no time to criticize others, to be too large for worry, too noble for anger, too strong for fear, and too happy to permit the presence of trouble, to think well of yourself and to proclaim this fact to the world, not in loud words, but in great deeds, to live in faith that the whole world is on your side, so long as you are true to the best that is in you." Peace be with you.